My name is Tanya Townsend, and the night that changed everything began as a birthday dinner. I was turning 25, and my parents, Sharon and Glenn, had suggested the Mill House, which was the nicest restaurant in our part of the county. I had dressed carefully and arrived hopeful, the way you arrive at things when you spend your whole life trying to earn a warmth that never quite comes. We were barely through the breadbasket when my mother set down her spoon, looked at me directly for what felt like the first time in years, and said she needed to tell me something. My first instinct, shaped by years of working in an emergency room, was to fold my hands, keep my face still, and wait. I was prepared for bad news about the farm or someone's health or money. I was not prepared for what she actually said. But before I tell you how that dinner ended, I need to go back to the beginning, because the dinner was only the final scene of a story that had been running for 25 years without my knowledge. I grew up on a Townsend farm, a 300-acre spread of corn and cattle just outside a small town, where your family name carries more weight than anything you personally accomplish. The Townsend name was carved into the stone of the local church. I was not introduced to people as a daughter. I was introduced as a girl the family had taken in, which is a particular kind of distinction that children understand even when no one explains it to them. I learned to say thank you before I learned to say no. I learned that belonging was something you had to continuously earn, and that the earning never quite finished. By 25, I had built a life through pure effort. I had put myself through nursing school on night shifts and student loans, earned a position in the emergency room at the regional hospital, and paid for my own small apartment above a hardware store on the edge of town. Everything I had made myself. In the emergency room, I was the person they called when a situation was deteriorating and someone needed to hold the room together. I trained myself not to show fear or panic, because panic in a nurse is contagious and people die from it. That training would serve me well in the months ahead, though I had no idea at the time how much I would need it. There was always something I could not explain about Sharon. For my entire childhood and into adulthood, she could not look at me directly. She would look at the dog, at the window, at her own hands, at the weather forecast on television. But when my eyes found hers, she would find somewhere else to be. I had decided long ago that she was simply a person who did not show affection, that some people were built that way, and that I should not take it personally. It took me 7 months of quiet, careful investigation to understand that her inability to look at me was not coldness. It was guilt. Glenn, my father, ran the household like a ledger. Every April when taxes were due, he would look over his glasses at me and ask if I knew how much I cost a family. I thought he was being grumpy in a way that farmers sometimes are, worn down by weather and debt and hard seasons. I did not understand that he was being literal. His sister Patrice was cut from the same cloth, but sharper about it. She ran the family gatherings and the church bake sales with the authority of someone who has lent money and intends to collect it for the rest of her life. She had given Glenn and Sharon a loan years before, and she reminded everyone of it constantly, especially me. She believed I owed the family something simply for existing within its borders. I spent summers in the fields when I should have been studying. I ran their errands. I attended every holiday dinner in a state of profound gratitude, making sure never to seem like I thought I deserved to be there. I did not understand why the house felt the way it felt until the day I was holding a piece of paper in the hospital hallway that did not make sense. Glenn had a heart attack in October, collapsing in the barn and arriving at my hospital by ambulance. It was a disorienting thing, being a nurse for the man whose name I carried. He needed surgery requiring a blood transfusion, and because he had a rare type, I offered to be tested as a potential donor. I have O-negative blood, the universal type. A colleague from the lab, someone I had trained myself, came back to find me wearing an expression I recognized immediately as the face people make when they have discovered something they don't know how to deliver. She said the results couldn't be right. I looked at the papers. Glenn's blood type was AB. Sharon had been typed as well, and she was also AB. 2 AB parents cannot produce an O-negative child. It is not a matter of probability or statistics. It is a simple biological impossibility. I stood in that hallway and did not cry. I did the arithmetic in my head, and then I told my colleague to log it as a labeling error, so it would not complicate Glenn's surgical clearance. Then I walked to the supply closet, sat down on a box of gauze, and gave myself 90 seconds to feel everything. Then I washed my face and went back to work that I did not confront anyone. I had no interest in accusations built on a single piece of evidence, however clear it seemed. I wanted to be certain before I did anything at all. I began searching quietly, the way I approach a complicated case, gathering facts before forming conclusions. I requested my own medical records and found that they began when I was 2 years old. There was nothing from infancy. I obtained my birth certificate and noticed immediately that it was an amended document, meaning it had been reissued after an adoption. The original was sealed by the state. I understood then that Glenn's annual comment about what I cost the family was not bitterness. It was, in some strange way, a record-keeping habit. He had always thought of me as a financial arrangement. The process of obtaining an original sealed birth certificate involves significant bureaucratic patience. I submitted the forms and waited. While waiting, I called the county records office and spoke with a woman named Bev, who told me something important without quite realizing she was telling me anything at all. She mentioned that my adoption had been classified as a kinship placement, meaning I had been adopted by a biological relative. I was not a stranger they had chosen to be generous toward. I was already theirs before the paperwork made official. That Sunday at family dinner, I asked Sharon, as casually as I could manage, whether she had any family in other states. She stopped chewing for just a moment. Then she said, "No, just us," and looked at the dog. I knew she was lying. The first person to crack the story open was my cousin Denny, who has always had the particular quality of saying whatever crosses his mind, especially after a few drinks. We were moving chairs after a family party when he mentioned, offhandedly, that I had arrived during the difficult period on Sharon's side of family. He referenced a grandfather named Walter, and then mentioned a sister before catching himself and telling me to forget he said anything. I stood holding a folding chair and understood that Sharon had a sister no one had ever spoken of in my presence. A kinship adoption, a grandfather named Walter, and a hidden sister. The secret wasn't in another city. It had been sitting at the table with me every Thanksgiving and Christmas for 25 years. I did not go looking for revenge. I went looking for facts. I submitted a DNA sample to one of the testing services and continued going to work and attending family dinners as though nothing had shifted. While I waited, I noticed that things in the Townsend household had become strange in a new way. Patrice was intensifying her commentary about everything the family had invested in me. Sharon suggested the birthday dinner at the Mill House with an enthusiasm I had never seen from her before. I saw Glenn coming out of a lawyer's office. When I asked whether the farm was in trouble, Sharon called me sweetheart, a word she had never used with me, and told me not to worry. Something was being prepared. I could feel it the way you feel a change in the weather before the clouds arrive. Then my DNA results came back. A close match, the level you expect from a grandmother or an aunt. The surname was Hollis. I sent a message to the testing site, saying I was searching for family. The reply came within hours. The person on the other end asked simply, "Is it really you?" Her name was Ruth, and she was my grandmother. She told me through tears that she had been looking for me for 25 years. Sharon had told the entire family that I had been adopted by strangers in another state, and that any contact would be harmful to my development. The truth was that I had grown up 15 minutes from a house where Ruth still lived, in the same small county, attending the same regional hospital where Dana, my biological mother, would sometimes come for appointments without ever knowing I worked there. Dana had been 17 when she had me. Their father was dying. The family was in crisis, and Sharon had told her younger sister that she would raise the baby, and that Dana could remain part of my life. Once the adoption was finalized, Sharon moved me across town and severed every connection. Dana had spent 25 years believing she had surrendered her child to a stranger in another state. She had gotten sober, built a steady life, and worked at a dental office, but she had never stopped wondering about me that I drove 3 hours to meet her. She looked like me in a way that sometimes stops you completely. The jawline, the posture, the way she held her coffee cup. I told her none of it was her fault. She had been a teenager in the worst year of her family's life, and she had trusted her older sister. I made the decision to bring Ruth and Dana to my birthday dinner. I genuinely believed, perhaps naively, that if everyone was in the same room and the truth was already known, there was a possibility of honesty and something like repair. I did not know that Sharon and Glenn had made their own plans for the evening. When I arrived at the mill house, I found a room with more guests than I expected, including several members of the church congregation. Sharon had wanted an audience, and she had assembled one. The dinner proceeded normally enough until Sharon stood up partway through. She announced to the table, in a voice calibrated for the room, that I was adopted. She said it like a weapon. She said they had kept me because I was a useful tax deduction. She called me useless now that I was an adult with my own income. Glenn produced a folder and explained that they were formally disowning me and removing my name from the farm's records. I did not cry. I stood up and said clearly that you cannot legally disown an adult, and that the folder was a theatrical gesture with no legal consequence. Then I told them that none of this was new information to me, that I had known for months, and that I had spent that time finding my real family. I turned toward the entrance of the restaurant and introduced Ruth and Dana, who were standing just inside the door. The room went completely quiet. Ruth walked toward Sharon and told her, in front of every church friend and neighbor Sharon had gathered as witnesses to my humiliation, that she had been lied to for 25 years, that she had mourned a grandchild who was alive and nearby the whole time. Sharon began screaming. The performance she had arranged as my public unraveling became instead the moment her own congregation saw her clearly for the first time. I walked away from that table. I walked toward Ruth and Dana. Ruth was holding a small folded blanket that she had kept for 25 years, a pale yellow thing from the year I was born, preserved in a drawer against the possibility that one day she might have reason to give it to me. She pressed it into my hands, and I held it and understood for the first time in my life what it felt like to be someone's family rather than someone's arrangement that I lost the farm that night. Not that it had ever truly been mine. I lost the name and the church and the holidays and the version of myself that had spent a lifetime being grateful for the privilege of staying. I gained a mother who had never stopped missing me, and a grandmother who had kept a baby blanket for a quarter of a century on faith alone that I changed my name. I am Tanya Hollis Townsend now. I kept Townsend because I earned my nursing credentials under that name, and the work it represents belongs to me. But Hollis comes first, because that is who I actually am. I still work in the emergency room. I am still the person they call when the room is falling apart. But I am not a guest anymore, performing gratitude and waiting to be asked to leave. I know where I come from, and I know what I am worth, and those are not things anyone gave me. They are things I found for myself when I stopped accepting other people's version of my own story. If you are carrying someone else's account of who you are and what you deserve, I want you to know that the original document exists. It is sealed, maybe, and a retrieval takes time and patience and a willingness to sit in a supply closet for 90 seconds and then go back to work. But it is there, and it belongs to you,